Hello everybody and welcome to Teach Me Coco. My name's Joel West and this is episode 2. Alright, in today's episode we're going to be going over objects and specifically with object-oriented programming, how that ties in with iOS development. Now objects is a fundamental paradigm in software development that's used in a lot of disciplines, but as iOS developers we will be using object-oriented programming practices, so it's going to be a really critical thing for you to understand as you progress in your iOS development career. So one of the most foundational things you'll need to learn, this will be a little bit more of a lecture series. In the first part, I'm going to go over several topics about what objects are and how we use them. And then in the second part, I'm going to give you an actual tour in Xcode of an object, and we'll make a really simple one. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll understand what an object is and why it makes sense to use this for organizing code. So we're going to go over what objects are, why we use them instead of something like a procedural process, how do we define an object? How do we create an object? And lastly, what can objects do for us as programmers to make our life easier? So let's jump right in. Okay, so what are objects? Well, the word object is one of the most generic words in the English language, and that makes a lot of sense because in programming, an object can be anything. It can be an image, such as the ones here on the screen. It can be text, like these labels. It can be a button. It can be something way less concrete. It can be a manager that manages network calls. It can be an interaction with a user. All an object really is a way of grouping code so you can reuse it. So anything can be an object. Really just comes down to a way to organize your code so it can be reused, and you only have to define it once. So think about creating a button on a screen like the cancel reset button you see in the second image there. Once you define that one time and you make your code that describes how it acts and what it does, you can reuse that code and you never have to write it again. Instead of every time you needed that button, defining it, defining the color, defining where it is, how it interacts, you just reuse that object you made. So the general point of object-oriented programming is to minimize code duplication. So I'm going to show you how exactly we go about doing that. Okay, so why do we use objects? So fundamentally it's to minimize code duplication, reuse code. It does make things simpler once you understand it. It's actually a really simple concept. It just takes a little while to get your head wrapped around it. And then inheritance is one of the most powerful features of objects. And what inheritance means is an object can be a subclass of another object. So what that means is you get all the functionality of the object that you're subclassing from, but you can add features. So for instance, if you had a car object or a vehicle object, you could subclass it and get all the features it has into like a motorcycle and just have more specific features. But don't worry too much about inheritance. That'll be the next topic we go over. But just understand that inheritance is one of the most powerful features of object-oriented design. And then lastly, we can segregate code into logical groups and keep these groups very small and isolated. So that way, when you change one object, it doesn't really affect the other objects. So it's a way for efficiency and minimize code duplication and keep everything really separate. Okay, so how do we define objects? Well, objects are defined with a class. When I first started learning iOS development, classes were something I kind of struggled with conceptually. I didn't really understand what they are. The way I like to explain it is it's an abstract definition of what an object is and what it can do. Think about a car as an object. Well, a class would be car. The car doesn't really refer to anything specifically, like your car or my car or someone else's car. It's just what a car is. A car can do things like drive, it can drive in reverse, it can have a different color, it can have a different top speed, it can even have a different number of wheels. But a car really isn't anything, it's a description of an idea. And that's what a class is. So you define a class of what a car is, and then you make an instance of that class. So my car is an instance of a car. My girlfriend's car is an instance of a car. So you define these classes and then you create actual instances of these objects. So then with these actual instances you can call methods or set properties on them. So an object may have a method like run if it's a car, or if it's a button it may have a method like pressed or change, or it could have properties like its background color, its text label. So you can group all these things to describe the object in a class and then you use your class to make an object. Now I realize that probably didn't make a lot of sense, so I made a graph here to help clear that up a little bit for you. So in this example here we have a car class. Now a class is defined with a header file and a .m file, so a .h and a .m file in Objective-C. If you're using Swift, it's just one Swift file. But what these two files do is they define what your object is, or a car. Not an actual instance of the car, but what a car is, what it can do with methods, or what properties it has with properties. So for instance, in this example, our car has a property called speed. So different cars that you make can have different speeds. Our car also has a property called color. Now color can be red, blue, whatever, but a car can have different colors. So we can add a little bit of flexibility with our car class. So we define our car, which I'll show you with our .h and our .m file. And then you can make instances of that object. So you can see in this example that I have my car. So car, called my car, equals car new. So we made an instance of that car, and then we set its color to gray. And then we made another car with the same class, a new object called your car, and your car's property of color is set to red. So you'll notice one thing here, that the property is called UI color. UI color is actually an object itself. So object can have other objects as properties. It can have methods that make other objects. Really, it's just a way of grouping all the functionality of a car into these two files, the .h and .m, and then we can reuse it wherever we want. So if you imagine a button again, Apple has a class called UI button. Well, they have a .h file that we can see. They have a .m file that it exists, but we're not allowed to see it because it's private. But these two files define what a UI button is in one place. And then wherever we need a button in our app, we can just say, hey, UI button new, and we can adjust the different properties. And the code's only written in one place, which is extremely efficient. And hopefully that makes a little bit of sense here. So let's jump right into Xcode and actually take a tour of what an object looks like.